Here is Frankie Boyer.
And welcome. It is nice to have you with us right here on Biz Talk Radio. So our first guest is a business innovation consultant and author of the upcoming book. It's called Breakthrough Thinking book series. And George Nagle, MBA, you are into innovation. Innovation, and innovation. That is you love innovation. And welcome to the program. And we hear this word a lot. We do hear it a lot. What does it mean? What does it mean to innovate?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question and one I get all the time. But, thanks for having me on the show. But, to define it, sometimes when you give people a definition, they don't really get it. So I'm going to give you the definition, and then I'm going to give you context for the definition. And that usually really helps clarify.
Okay.
So real innovation is a process where we take an idea and we make it into something extremely useful that nobody else has ever seen. So the reason I say we need some context around that, because some people would say, well, that's just creativity made into an idea, and not necessarily. And some people say, well, what's differentiation between innovation and iteration? So I'm going to define some of that. So innovation, again, is brand new, something that people get excited about is how we use innovation. And iteration would be, maybe the next version of the iPhone, right? We've seen it. It's got this one or two little extra features, and that's really all that it is. But innovation, it's something audacious. It's something maybe a little crazy when we see it, but when people see it, right, the public see it, they get excited. That's how we define innovation.
And do you have to be a visionary to be an innovator?
Not necessarily, no. Some of the best people at innovation, and we were all this at some point, are kids. Think about some of the creativity and some of the craziness that kids come up with. And if you look at some of the things that are coming out between the ages of 18 to 22 right now in the world, they're certainly not visionaries. Some of them are, but most of them aren't. They have an idea, and it's something that's brand new, and they're just doing it.
So I agree with you. Is it innate?
It's innate from the creativity side, right? At some point, we were all children, so we are all creative.
Yes.
The issue is getting that creativity out as an adult and using what I'm going to term childlike thinking, but not acting childish. So from that prescriptive, yes, it's very innate, but the how isn't. And the reason that how isn't is because as adults, we start to really be reductive in our thinking, and we just get locked into our lives, and more habits start to really just become a system for us. And we don't know how to break out of that, because the moment we do, fear becomes a part of our lives. And fear, Frankie, I gotta be the one to say it, is by far the strongest emotion as humans that we have. And I hate to say that because I know everybody wants love to be the strongest emotion, and it simply isn't.
I think you're absolutely right, George. Let's go back to our childhood for just a moment. When we were kids, we had the ability to be free to do whatever we needed to do and run around and paint with our fingers. It was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful time. Are we overscheduling and understimulating the creative side to kids today and not allowing them to be kids, especially with mask wearing and the regulations and COVID and kids being at home and what's been happening?
Yeah, so I think we have a double-edged sword with that. So let's address the negative, and then we'll address the positive, right? So the mask wearing for younger kids, they don't know any different, and they're kind of coping. But some of the older kids, that is a form of restriction, and they are already feeling that I don't like the word resentment, but that angst against that, and it puts us in a negative frame of mind, which by its very nature does start to increase how our creativity gets diminished. Now,
Yes.
the positive, because I want to touch on it, because you mentioned about being at home. At home, we have more freedom than we would necessarily in a school, right? So, or even in a daycare. The regiment of being somewhere other than home is in its very nature restricted. And where we start usually to be diminished again in our creativity is with the education system. And please understand, I'm not knocking the education system by saying that. It's just an artifact of, you need to sit down. You can't just draw out of the lines. No, you can't just sit there and have a random game with your friend. No, you can't use that specific word anymore because that's a no word. Or even, you can't say that 2 plus 2 is equal to 22. It's just the nature of the beast.
The problem that I'm listening to you, and the problem that I'm seeing today is that we're not getting the full facial expressions that we have with face mask wearing. That's number one. And I also feel that there's so much that needs to be jammed in, and the overscheduling. And so, now that we're getting back into the reality of our world and we're moving past COVID, this is, I think, why so many people have left their jobs. This is why there's so much rebellious tones going on around the country and around the world. And I think people are looking for change. They don't quite know how to embrace it, though, George.
Yeah. So you're spot on about the facial expression in the communication. That's really critical to how we as a species communicate and deliver messaging. And it can make all of the difference in a message. There's no doubt. And when we lose that, we do have a negative circumstance or result of it. But the overjamming of schedules for kids and adults alike absolutely causes burnout. So you mentioned at the beginning, the series that I've written, the Breakthrough Thinking series. One of the books is called The 5-Letter F Word. And in that book, I flat out tell people, if you have more than 5 things that you're doing too many things because you're not actually concentrating on what's important and delivering on it. So when we have our schedules so full of stuff, what happens specifically is our mind gets burnt out. Our mind is no different than any other muscle in our body. So, Frankie, I want you to imagine if you had a 12-ounce can of water or whatever it is, and you extended your arm fully out holding that. You can hold that maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and then you're going to start to really feel a burn, and you're going to want to put it down. Now, imagine if it was 2 or 3 hours later. Your muscle is fatigued. It needs a rest. Our brain is the same exact way. The problem is we tend to have those cans of projects or overstimulated schedules, like not 1 or 2, but 10 or 12 of those. And our brain just looks for an escape and for a rest. And that's where that desire for change comes in. But here's the thing, Frankie. We are creatures of habit. We get locked into habits, and we don't always recognize, we don't have the awareness to recognize all the time what a good habit and a bad habit is because we just get so locked into them. And that's where we need some ways to break out and tap into our childlike thinking and bring our creativity out. So
is it fair to say, George Nagle, that you go to work every day to play?
In many regards, yeah. So I get that luxury of having that creativity and that playfulness always at the top of my mind. I am a big believer in doing what I preach. So I'm constantly reminding myself of keeping in that frame. I can tell you if I'm starting to get frustrated and I catch myself, I stop what I'm doing and I do something different, even if it's for just 5 minutes to break myself out.
Hey, we have to We have to take a quick break, though. But when we come back, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the burnout and how this innovative thinking needs to be exposed in all of our lives, and it might be very helpful. So give us the website as we take a quick break.
Sure. So it's just ideationemporium.com.
And we'll be back with George Nagle in just a moment. This is Frankie Boyer. Stay tuned, Biz Talk Radio. And welcome back. It is Frankie Boyer, Biz Talk Radio, and George Nagle is with us today, business innovation consultant. And George has a series of books coming up very soon, in Breakthrough Thinking book series. And tell us about your company and where you got the name from.
So the name is the Ideation Emporium of Creativity, and it really kind of got inspired by a couple of different things. One of them is absolutely Disneyland. If you go there, you'll be able to go into the Emporium, which is just a unique shop of different things. And we do ideation or brainstorming or idea building, all the same type of things. And because it's based first in creativity, we had to have that as part of the name. It gets to be a little bit of a mouthful, but it's something that my kids absolutely got as soon as I kind of explained it, and they enjoy it. So I knew it was on the right path. But what we do is we can work with companies on doing a couple of different things. One is helping them establish what to focus on, how to write a strategy and prioritize around it, and help them also bring in culture change for their employees and for themselves. Then we can go into bringing awareness around how our brains process. And once we have that awareness, then we can actually get to creativity and innovating with customers in a more in-depth manner, so that when we bring things to the market, they're an absolute winner. And then we actually have one more thing that goes with it, and it's a faster method that's specific for innovation, for true innovation on what most people would call a stage and gate process. So we bring that all together to really help companies refocus and understand where they're coming from, so that they can define where they're going to go and get everybody there together.
And you're also a certified instructor in the fourth method of innovation?
I am, yeah. So the fourth method is a different type of methodology on innovation and how to map out a successful plan. Fantastic method. It does incorporate portions of iteration to it. So I have actually studied several different methods of innovation and have different accolades for all of those. The difference is I've kind of pulled what I think are some of the best bits and focused specifically on true innovation and how to move the market forward.
So why do we have such a hard time with innovative thinking? What are those barriers that are standing in the way? Because so many people are they're looking for answers, George, and they don't know where to go and how to find them.
Yeah. So there's really 6 things that go into that. And I'll touch on the most important one last, but the first one is time. So Frankie, have you ever caught yourself sitting there thinking, I don't have time to eat lunch, let alone get to the 20 other million tasks that are in front of me? And I'm sure that you have, because we all have. But here's a key to that. The only thing that we really have is time. And we only get so much of it. So how we spend it's important. And when we stop for just 15 minutes a day, ideally an hour, but 15 minutes a day, and just think. We don't have to think about anything work-related or even home-related, just something of interest. It starts to unlock our brain. It's a natural stress reliever for us. Then the second thing that we really focus on is the fact that we are so risk adverse. It's fear. People are just really locked up by fear. And I'm here to tell you there's a difference between being afraid and fear. Being afraid is about an immediate danger in front of you. Like, hey, there's a tiger over there and it's not caged. Okay, that's a valid valid fear. The rest of fear for humans is something that we made up in our head and we're making presumptions about. It's not real. So we like to say that fear is more served as an acronym of false evidence appearing real. So we need to get past that. And then language. Wow, language is such a barrier. So earlier we were talking about communication and removing face masks and the power that comes from that. But the words that we use and the context that we use them matter. And then even between colleagues that let's say, are both scientists, sometimes even the words that are being commonly used might have a different generational difference in the definition. And that's a big barrier to creativity as a whole, but it also plays into how our brains process and move things forward. And then really the last one, and this is how people process and feel appreciated, is we have ideas that just get neglected, right? So if an idea gets proposed and people don't review it in a timely manner, people will make up stories about, well, they don't care about us. They don't care about me. They don't care about my ideas. Or a big one, and this is where iteration comes from, is when an idea gets neglected and it becomes diluted because it's filling some internal requirement and ignoring what the customer actually said was needed. That's where we get some barriers, just natural barriers created. And then, Frankie, the last one is you, right? Everybody is their own barrier, and it's the biggest barrier that we have. And the reason is because of our bias. And our bias is made up of our experiences and our expertise. Those experiences have gotten us this far in life, right? Like there's some validity to that.
So
the problem is,
we're almost out of time, and I just want you to help with one thought before I say goodbye to you, George, and that is, what's the first step to getting a different perspective? So how can we get people to think differently?
So one is to recognize you have a biased thought pattern, and the second is to recognize you have to get out of it. So the fastest way to get out of that thought process is through laughter and having fun. And when I say having fun, I don't mean just joking around at the water cooler. I mean intentional fun that has a purpose to it, but it's truly fun. When we start laughing, it breaks us out of what we're going to call our basic beta and gets us into our aspiring alpha. And that's where creativity really starts to flourish.
Yeah, I so agree with you. That is so brilliant. Absolutely. I think, and now more than ever with what's happening in the world, to just tune all of it out for just a moment and just sit back and be grateful for what we do have right now, today, what we do have, and putting a little humor in would be so great.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really important. So one of the books in the Breakthrough Theory series is Miserable at Work, Why? You Don't Have to Be. And we actually really emphasize those points throughout the entire book. Some people have read it and they said that they wish they had read it earlier.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure. So we're almost out of time, George Nagle. So people can find your books. Where can they get everything?
Well, they're about to be released. They'll absolutely be available on Amazon, but the fastest place to find them is at Ideation, ideationemporium.com. There's a reading list right there, and they're right at the top as soon as they're coming out, which should be in the next week.
Wonderful. Congratulations. Thanks so much for being with us, George. And we'll take a quick break and be back in just a moment. This is Frankie Boyer, Biz Talk Radio.